Your brand may be staying on top of current trends, but are you agile enough to stay relevant, resilient, and successful as customers, competition, and the world continues to change at a breakneck pace? I'm thrilled to share the newly revised version of my first book, The Agile Brand. I'm calling it The Agile Brand Revisited. It's been updated to reflect our continually changing world, and it provides 7 principles that form the backbone of an agile brand, offering detailed insights and actionable steps for incorporating them into your business strategy. This is the book that started it all, and I'm excited to share it with you. It's now available in print and digital formats and available everywhere. Learn more by going to the Agile Brand Guide website at www.agilebrandguide.com.
Have you heard about Jackbeat, your curbside drive-through grocer? Did you know we're fast? Fastest groceries in town. Download and open our app. Place your order, drive up, we'll load your groceries, and you drive off with a smile. The fastest groceries in town. Get $25 in free groceries when you download our app. Hurry! This offer expires Sunday, July 23rd. 2 Edmond area locations, Danforth and Santa Fe, 178th and North May. The $25 in Jackbeat Cash is for new customers only and requires account setup. Visit jackbeatnibble.com for more details.
It's time to gather loved ones together for all the holidays' best spread. Lynn's has great prices on all your favorite Thanksgiving items, from delicious turkey with all the fixings to mashed potatoes and yummy pies. We have everything you need to create your perfect Thanksgiving dinner. Whether it's cooking the traditional meal, completely store-bought, or a combination of both, your best holiday meal starts here. Learn more and start shopping today at linsgrocery.com. Lynn's, where delicious begins.
Welcome to Season 4 of The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we discuss business agility through customer experience, employee experience, and digital transformation. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed on this show, you can go to my website at gregkihlstrom.com and read my latest articles or get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile Brand podcast. Today, we're going to talk about hyper-personalized communications and why it is so important to tailor the customer experience you provide. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Eric Frankel, CEO and co-founder of AdGreetz. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hey, Greg, thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about this topic with you. So why don't you start by giving a little background on yourself as well as what led you to start AdGreetz?
So immediately following college, I was lucky enough to get hired by Warner Brothers, who was more or less the number one movie and television company in the world in those days, where I spent the next 30 years. And while I was at Warner Brothers, in addition to eventually running a multi-billion-dollar division there, I always was intrigued by innovation and the next big thing. So because we made more movies, more television shows, and had a larger library, I woke up one day and decided that television shouldn't be about what's on ABC tonight at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock, but television should be in a format where you and I and all of your listeners could press a button and more or less watch whatever they want, whenever they want, which we now know as Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime Video and so on. So that didn't exist. There was YouTube where we could watch a cat video or how to bake banana bread. And there was video on demand where we could spend $4 and watch the newest Harry Potter movie. So as I went to all of my clients who bought these billions of dollars worth of products and gave them our vision or my vision of what television should be, they said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. No one would ever click a button. Why would they want to pick and choose when they could just go over to HBO or whatever? We disagreed because we knew that there were 450,000 people in dorm rooms with fast internet stealing our movies every night. And it took a ridiculous 12 years to convince the industry to embrace what we all take for granted. And thus television was reinvented and my division started making billions and billions of additional dollars. I woke up one day and before, Greg, we were all casual in t-shirts and blue jeans and Nike sneakers. I used to wear suits and ties and luxury items. And one day I said to myself, I have next to no affinity to any brand because brands communicate with me either through things that look like letters from 1964 that became emails, or things that look like print ads from 1986 that became emails, that then became banner ads, or the TV commercials that you and I grew up with became ads on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and what have you. And most brands treated you and me no differently than a 12-year-old girl or a 92-year-old grandmother or grandfather. And it was traditional one-size-fits-all generic messaging. There was too much data out there. So I decided that I was going to leave Warner Brothers and try to reinvent this $768 billion and growing industry. And I got together with a few of my former clients, the former chairman of HBO, the former chairman of 20th Century Fox, the former chairman of the Walt Disney Company, the former president of CBS. And what we do is we come up with a strategy and work with brands, agencies, and now ad platforms and take that Macy's commercial that ran for a decade, telling you and me and all your other listeners that we want to shop the Macy's Super Saturday Sale so we can save 40% on items like these. And then they would show us a dress, high heels, and women's jewelry. Right. And Greg, I'm going to assume for a moment that you may not wear a dress, high heels, or women's jewelry.
Not usually, no.
I would call that an ad that makes me scratch my head. So in turn, we might talk to you and me about things that we like, the right SKUs. We might remind you where your local Macy's is. We might say the sale starts in 24 hours. So we make smart, relevant, data-driven ads and messages on 26 channels. A channel can be email, a channel can be Facebook. A channel has now become television, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and every place more or less that you can see a message. And the logic is, instead of us, saying, I don't like this ad or message because it's irrelevant, we make it easy. Where is your Burger King, Greg? Or if you want to order, what's the name of the delivery mechanism in the DC area, which might be Uber Eats, but where I live, it might be called, something different. Yeah. So let's not make all the consumers have to go to Google, do all this work, which most people won't do. Let's create relevant ads, next to no friction, that a consumer can click or very easily go and spend their money. And then let's add customer experience and customer journey and welcome people and thank people and turn $100 transactions into $300 by saying, Greg, thanks so much for buying this pair of Levi's jeans. It's not a letter, it's not a print ad, it's a compelling video or whatever the appropriate message should look and feel like. And we say our way of saying thanks, shop again during the month of March and save X percentage and make you like the brand, because today the only one who thanks us for anything in life is the host or hostess at a restaurant on our way out the door.
Nice. Well, no, thanks for that background there. And we're going to dive a little deeper into your company, AdGreetz, in a minute. But first, I want to just take a step back and just discuss some of the current challenges and opportunities when it comes to hyper-personalized customer communication. So, while many of our audience members are already aware of the importance of this, and they're, either they're already doing a lot of personalization, some personalization, or at least getting started in it. Can you elaborate on, what's at stake if brands don't address this growing consumer need?
Well, I would argue what's at stake is companies going out of business. And I'm not trying to be dramatic, but one of the things that got me started, and I use that Macy's example quite a bit, is because while Macy's was spending $900 million a year telling you and me to buy dresses and high heels, they were closing 142 stores and bleeding in the streets. Yeah. So, I no longer track or haven't seen the articles as much during the pandemic, but there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of retailers and brands that have gone out of business. And part of it has to do with ineffectively spending money. There are certain things where we have to buy. but it's, being beaten by the competition. It's, being hurt. Every day we read about companies that are successful, and then we read about other companies that are going through various forms of pain. And this is a fairly easy, affordable way to give yourself a much better shot at delighting past, current, or potential customers and beating the heck out of the competition. Because even though I believe the whole world will end up embracing this and doing this, call it over the next 3 to 7 years, only the smart ones are raising their hand now. And where you say a lot of our people may be doing it, I would argue, as a person who's probably spoken to 5,000 brands and agencies, I would argue that probably 97% of all brands aren't yet. Now they're starting to understand it and say, tell me more. And this is interesting versus like, what's wrong with talking to Greg and Eric about high heels? But that doesn't mean that they're raising their hand and jumping on the bandwagon yet.
Yeah. Well, and so to that point, getting first understanding, but then, getting started with it. I think to your point, a lot of brands understand. I mean, they read the stats that,
Right.
Customers respond better to personalized experiences. Right. Like we know, I think most, if not all, are bought in on the premise, but the actual operationalizing and execution of it, what's standing in their way?
Well, first off, it's, there's an emotional and mental block, which I would argue old bad habits die slowly.
Yeah.
So you have a history of a business whereby brands have had relationships with agencies and have spent a week, a month, or multiple months torturing themselves about what their next video ad should look like, then spending large amounts of money to make that, and being obligated to then run that one ad for weeks or months and months again. So, for example, interestingly enough, and this isn't a bias towards a country or a culture, but we do a lot of business in India. And it seems like in India, the brands and culture embraces personalization even more than the US. I don't know why. I'm not a social scientist, but I think there's less of a history of old bad habits and more of an environment to embrace new and exciting, trends. So one is you have to want to do something. Next, you bring up, forget about operational. It's more work. It is, right. There's a business whereby you're an executive at BMW and your creative agency comes in and pitches you 4 different ideas. You select number 3. You give them $1 million to make that ad or message. Your media agency comes in and says, to sell that through, we're going to need $200 million. And you say, you've got 150, do what you can. And everybody sits back. Now you have to sit here and say, what if there were 100 versions, 1,000 versions, 10,000, or 1 million? What are those variables? How do we approve all of that? And it's really shaking it up. And there are a lot of people who are just very complacent about doing the same old thing. COVID, I would argue, on one hand, maybe has even added to that because they're not in an office. They're happy to sit in their corner at home, hope their boss doesn't call, and they're waiting for retirement rather than, and then there are other executives who say, I want to reinvent, I want to move the needle, I want to sell more cars, blue jeans, get more people in my restaurant. And then there's the worry and the reality of the operational aspects that have taken us 10 years to go from mediocreness to pretty darn good at and try to get better at it every week and every month. But I would argue it's about old bad habits and it's about a desire. And I've found as a slightly older guy that there are a lot of people who would be happy to do the same old thing, whether it's working well or not, or whether you're closing 142 stores.
Right.
Because.
Yeah. And I mean, I think to your point, it is a mindset in a sense that can be the blocker. I mean, we're here on the Agile Brands podcast, so I'll throw in my plug for Agile, whether it's strict Agile or just less formal. But the approach of I know that, at some level, there's some testing done with most things anyway, but the idea of incremental change, testing a lot of options. And I think it's a matter of, a lot of control has been given to creatives to make
yes.
Yeah, I would say an arbitrary choice of what is subjectively best, right? And so that's a lot of power for one small group or individuals or whatever to be making, assuming they know what large groups are going to make. And I think the new approach to that is much what you're saying, which is we don't have to make one thing that, one size that fits all.
Right. There's a whole, when we talk about old bad habits dying slowly, I talk to the heads of creative who are frequently, 45, 55, 65-year-old executives who have been in the business for, decades and decades. And I find that often, and this isn't sour grapes and I'm not grumpy at all, but quite often they care more about winning a Cannes Lion Award because the commercial's cool than they care if it got one person to test drive a car, go to that store, fly that airline, go to that hotel, whatever it might be. Yeah. So there's a lot of that. And yes, and there's a preciousness to their creative. So we're not trying to bastardize or screw around with their creative, because some of the changes can be as simple as reminding you where the store is, calling out a city name. We just did this on streaming television for a very significant beverage superstore chain. And we ran 104 million impressions on very popular streaming channels that have an ad-supported version of. So you're sitting, whether you're on your phone or whether you're in your den, up comes a commercial for this, and we call out your city. We'll just call it Bethesda. Here's how you can celebrate the holidays. And then we remind you that your local store is at 4242 Main Street. And the next time you see it, we're going to tell you. So I think we did a 12-mile radius. The next time we'll tell you a store that's 7 miles away, and the next time that's 10 miles away. And we did 2.3 times greater sales, they did, from the people who saw one with an address. People went to the store twice versus once, and people spent more each time they went than the people who saw the generic version. So just something simple like that, just getting your eyeballs that says, hey, Bethesda, and then telling you where the location is. Because, for example, I didn't know where the store location was closest to me.
Right. Yeah. And that, in the way you're describing that, it's not compromising the creative or watering down a strong message or things like that. Certainly, I've done enough brand work and all that stuff myself to certainly appreciate that. But I think the fact that we're increasingly getting inundated with brand messages means, it does have to be more relevant. And I think it's a constraint, just like any other. I think, often creativity actually works well within constraints and sometimes works better within constraints. And so if the constraint is it needs to be personalized, then, I think it's certainly acceptable loss, especially when you're talking about 2.5 times gains, right?
Exactly. And by the way, I'll give you an interesting stat, and then I'll give you the better version than the ad we just mentioned. I had a very sophisticated executive at a, U.S. world-renowned creative agency 2 days ago who told me that their company claims that 86% of all ads are invisible. I'm just quoting your number. The point is that's a lot of wasted time, energy, and money. But rather than just calling up Bethesda, Maryland, and the store address and rotating that, today you have the ability to, instead of showing me this type of vodka in that ad, we could be showing people brands they like, utilizing that brand data, or we can get rid of the dresses and replace them with blue jeans or T-shirts or button-down shirts or sweaters. So, and my point of view is we're not trying to take over the creative. We want that grumpy 45, 55, 65-year-old creative to embrace this and to think this is the greatest thing. And we want them to use their talent and their skill set to help create those beautiful different versions. And then what we offer is a lot of the tooling that makes it where you're not building the World Trade Center by hand, but we can help create these versions in hours or a day versus weeks and weeks. And then we have the tooling that pushes them into all the respective ad platforms in minutes and hours versus weeks. And then all of the reporting that tells you what's happening where, when, in integrated live dashboards and so on, so that you can see what's going on and then learn and revise again and learn and revise again and always try to improve what you're doing week to week to week.
Yeah. And so, with personalization, there's a lot of upsides. I think the other issue at play is I wouldn't even say it's a downside, but it's, data privacy concerns and, consumers being skeptical of, okay, well, that's freaky that you just showed Bethesda in that ad because I live in downtown Bethesda, Maryland.
Right.
How do you recommend that brands handle that aspect? I mean, most of the time it's really beneficial, but is there a line not to cross? What do you recommend there?
Sure. You certainly want to avoid creepy.
Right.
It's a little hard to answer because unfortunately I'm no longer at a Warner Brothers where we would go out and spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars doing focus groups and asking people. So the only thing that we can really do is we don't really work with a brand or an agency before doing a retroactive analysis. So it isn't about what I think or what you think or the person who thinks it's creepy. What we do is we sit there and say, what did brand XYZ, what's been their history for the last couple of years? When they make this 1 or 5 versions of an ad or message and push it out, how many people clicked? How much revenue did they generate? How long did people watch? What are all the relevant metrics and KPIs based on that specific brand and campaign and agency's goals and objectives? Yeah. And then what we do is we look at what happened after the fact. And about 98% of the time, we're destroying their historic numbers, which are based on 3 years of them, in theory, mastering what they do. And here is our little David versus Goliath, so to speak, even though we don't think of it like that. Right. We're coming in, and in 1 month, when all of a sudden you're reducing the cost to acquire a client by 10, 20, or 48%, when you're getting people to go from watching for 4 seconds to 20 seconds, when you're breaking records across the board, we could sit here and go, well, who didn't like it? Who thought it was creepy or scary? Or holy moly, we've just brought down costs, brought up engagement, brought up activation, replaced things that look like 1964 letters, print ads, and show smiling families to 23-year-old young men who are looking for a girlfriend or a boyfriend. So, we don't know. But one of the things to do is, you can't really on ad platforms talk to people by name, which is primarily what they consider. So you can do things that are very subtle. And subtle means an ad talking to you about shaving type of, goods and services versus lipstick is probably a much smarter ad for Greg.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I've been doing this long enough that, personally, I'm kind of annoyed when things aren't tailored to me, to your point. And I think the numbers are I don't have, stats sitting in front of me, but the numbers are trending that way. I mean, not only, do people, support brands that understand them better, but also they are actually put off by brands that don't take the time or don't put the effort to give them personalized experiences or communication. So, I think the world is moving in that direction as well, fortunately. As long as brands are ethical and, data usage and all that stuff.
Yeah, of course. And obviously you can't be in this business today, and not be PII and GDPR compliant.
Exactly.
I'll give you a good example. If you or any of your listeners were to go to the Disney theme parks website right now and sit there and say, I would like to be on your mailing list, within an hour or 4, you will get a welcome email. Their welcome email looks like a receipt that you've just sent your great aunt Agnes a package via DHL. It's probably the least compelling, most plain Jane, boring message that anyone has ever seen. Yet Disney theme parks are the place where magic lives. It's, and they have the ability with all of their characters to be able to have Mickey Mouse talking to Greg because you've given them your name. You've said, I want to hear from you. So we go to Disney and we show them an animated version, or whether it's Woody or any of their dozens of characters. And one, you get a thanks for signing up, and you go, God, that's ugly and depressing and doesn't look anything like Disney. And the other, you would sit here and you would call in your family members and you would say, take a look at this. Look how cool this is. I've never seen anything like this. And I don't think you would call it creepy. You would call it delightful, magical, and reflective of the brand. And there's a much better chance you would click and say, guess what, guys, we're spending $250 per family member and buying tickets and going to pay $40 to park and going to buy $18 hamburgers and pay $300 to stay at their hotel. And we're all going to a Disney, theme park.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one last question before we wrap up here. Where do you see hyper-personalization going? What do you see as the biggest opportunity right now for brands to really start embracing this?
Well, like anything in the world, when I talk about old bad habits dying slowly, we don't say, hey, man, you need to reinvent everything you do. I think you need to test and you need to learn and you need to garner experience. So you can pick a market. You can pick a channel. Hey, let's see what happens if we improve our email. Let's see what happens if we do something on our app. Let's try this on Facebook, but try it in 5 cities or 3 states. Or, so you need to put your toe in the water. You don't have to spend $1 million to do this. Someone like us, a brand typically pays us about $33,000 a month. So if you're a mom and pop with 3 stores, today, what we do is unaffordable for you. But if you're Macy's spending $900 million a year, this is an eye drop in the ocean. So any clever idea that anyone has in any business, as long as it's affordable, you should try to, create a smart test and see what happens and then learn from it and try it again in a slightly different manner and see if it pays for itself and if it makes customers like you and differentiates you and generates money and reduces costs and all of those benefits. So we're finding we've gone about from 55% of people saying, tell me more versus 5% of people telling us more. So we think we're going to see a lot of people embracing it. We think the industry and people in general, without sounding mean-spirited, are lemming-like, and they follow versus lead. So we find a lot of the leaders, and as they lead and succeed, we'll be reading about it. We'll be hearing about it. We just started doing this on television. We think that's going to become very popular. And then there'll be people at brands who will be talking to their marketing guys saying, why aren't we telling them where the Ford dealership is? Why aren't we telling them where the local McDonald's is? Why aren't we showing a smiling family if Greg has a young family at home that he has to feed versus, young guys just hanging out, going to McDonald's because my 23-year-old isn't married and doesn't have a young family.
Right. Nice. Well, yeah. Well, Eric, thanks so much for joining the show. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with what you and AdGreetz are doing?
That's a good question. I guess what you do is you go to our, you can go to our website, AdGreetz, AdGreetz.com. You can probably ask to be put on the mailing list at info@adgreetz.com. You're welcome to send me a note. We respond to every email we get, eric@adgreetz.com, ERIC. And we're, here to help and educate. And we do this all around the world in lots of countries and lots of languages. And the whole world will go here. And the reason I start off with that streaming story is that took 12 years and now we take it for granted. And I suspect, Greg, if we were to come back in 5 years, this will be something that at least half the brands do versus 3 or 4% of brands doing.
Yeah. Again, I'd like to thank Eric Frankel, CEO and co-founder of AdGreetz, for joining the show. Thanks for listening to The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom. Talk with you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.theagilebrand.show. To get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, visit my website at gregkihlstrom.com. Until next week, stay agile.